Hi friends, this is Marilyn from tarotclarity.com, and today's video will particularly please my followers who prefer to see videos on how to interpret non-scenic pip style decks. So this one's for you guys. My channel is a combination of historic tarot decks as well as how to, interpret particularly TDM or particularly non-scenic pip style decks. Now, sometimes people ask me, are you a collector or what are you? It's like, well, yeah, I guess I am a collector because I have a lot of decks. But first and foremost, I'm an interpreter of the cards. I've been interpreting the cards since I was 17 years old. I'm 63 now, do the math. So I've been interpreting the cards for a very, very, very long time. If you think about it, it's like going on 50 years, And in that course of 50 years, of course, I've gone down multiple rabbit holes regarding tarot, and it's impossible not to be, I don't want to use the word seduced or enchanted, because it kind of sounds, a little witchy, but it's, but those are appropriate words. It's hard not to be enchanted, by the art and by the history. I want to know more, So that's what brings me a lot of times to wanting to share the vast beauty, that tarot has spread throughout, throughout Europe in particular, and then by extension, other countries that have slowly but surely, become interested in tarot, not as a game, although a lot of people still continue to play tarot as a game, but, as a form of divination. Now, it wouldn't be a Marilyn video without a map, and I think I'm starting a trend, so if you see it someplace else, remember where you saw it first, right? The 4 decks that I'm using because I feel as though they are particularly expressive. The pips. I'm not showing any of the triumph cards or the trump cards. I'm just showing the pips in this video. The first deck I want to share is technically I believe from Belgium, but it's greatly influenced by the northeastern region of France, the Rouen area of France, and that is the Adam C. Hotot. This particular deck was created by Tarot Sheet Revival and Sullivan Hismans. And I've chosen it because I believe that the pips are particularly expressive. I've tried to pick a few cards from each suit. The second deck that I'm focusing on is the Gassman Tarot. This deck from 1840, and I believe the Hotot is around 1723 or 25 or something like that. More than 100 years later, from the from Switzerland, which again, if we look at the map, nestled right above the Piedmont region of Italy, and France and what was coming out of Marseille. So we'd see some influences, cross influences. This particular deck was realized by Yves Renaud. And I think it's, not necessarily a facsimile deck, but close to one. The third deck, I think, is also particularly expressive in their pips. I have 3 versions of the Vachetta. This particular one is by Il Meneghello, and I believe that this one, of the 3 versions that I have, is by far the nicest one. I believe this this deck was originally created in 1893. Okay. And then the last deck is not a historic tarot deck at all. But it is a modern day recreation. It's got an Italian name. So maybe it's kind of like an ode to the ancient decks if they were a little more twisted. And this one, of course, is created by Patrick Valenza. The Trionfi dalla Luna. Okay, so let's take a look at these, some of these decks. And I haven't pulled many cards from each because I try to keep my videos as concise as I can. So here we have the Two of Swords. Now, I should mention that I have a playlist of associating numbers with their suit. It's a numerology playlist. I'll put a link to the playlist down below in this descriptive area. But sometimes, not all. It's good to have a vocabulary of suit and number, but sometimes you're really more struck by the image, right, than combining suit and number. Now, if I were to see the Two of Swords, there might be a conflict. It depends on the question. It depends on the question that the seeker has, right, or the circumstance that you're trying to shed light on. But sometimes you see a card and you're more struck by what's in it than by maybe how the two and swords combined would answer the question. And here we have almost like a frame, of a precious scene that's happening in real life. Almost like to say, well, your hustle and bustle of everyday life and how busy you might be and in the middle of something, important. But there's things that happen in the framework of everyday life that are just as important, but we tend to sometimes not notice or neglect. And this might be, an alternate way of interpreting this card, depending on the context of the question. I always interpret the cards in the context of the situation or the question that the querent has. And that, if I keep the question in mind, it helps me understand better the meaning of the card if there are multiple ways to understand a card. Here, we have these swords, this Eight of Swords just pressuring in on this beautiful, cherished thing, It's like the tension is palpable, and any more tension will destroy what it's trying to save and preserve. And here we have, so much tension and such a frenzy that it's almost like, you're throwing rocks in a lake from two ends and then they meet in the middle, and it's just like, it's like there's so much that it just sort of starts fresh. And this card here really does show, I think it really illustrates, the meaning of 10, where it's so overdone that there's nothing left but the beginning. Moving on to a few samples from the cups. We have, the stability of 4 cups, and you can get into the numerological and the, suit combinations. But the one thing that strikes me is this arrow, right? It almost seems like, hey, take a look at the card that comes beneath me or that falls beneath me. So, aside from interpreting the card in the way I understood it, I would take the time to notice what falls beneath it, because it's almost offering you a roadmap. Take a look. Another thing about this particular deck, and how do you not notice, is that, is the border. Just sometimes that might play into it, into the reading. Now here we have, whenever I see, and excuse me, this is batons. I got this in the wrong pot. Oh, no, I'm not doing by, for a second I thought I was doing swords. Forgive me, I had a senior moment. Because sometimes when I see batons, especially when we get in the higher numbers, now I realize this is only 5 and this is 6. But sometimes, I see an X, and it's just like, there's a block. It depends on where it falls in the spread, right? But here we have it could be a crossroads. It could just be, the beginning of a barrier. But then you see growth coming from the sides. And it's almost like, okay, don't focus so much on what you can't do, but focus on what's on the fringe. Like focus on what you might be able to accomplish if you're not focused on what you cannot do. And it almost is like the very cliched expression, think outside of the box, right? Okay, so you can't do this, you can't proceed. They're making it very hard and tricky. But if you go on the fringe, you might find your success. It's like, okay, I can't make it on Broadway, but if I go on off Broadway or off Broadway, there may be an opportunity for me or something like that. And then here with the 6, it's just one card more. But it almost looks as though, well, the opportunity maybe, maybe it's going to be a little more difficult. You see, they're disentangled. They're no longer being grown from, it's not, unlike the 5, the growth is not coming directly, as an offshoot. It's already been severed, So maybe the window of opportunity has been fleeting. Maybe you've missed the window of opportunity on this. Or if you don't act quickly, you might. I chose these because, 1, the 6, 2 are semi-protected. 4 are free. And here 4 are free, but 1 is very closely guarded. Almost like, protecting something, like a secret. I guess it all depends on the context of the question, of course. Here in the center, we have a flower. Here in the center, we have a coin. Just going cold, I'm not necessarily struck by how to apply this to a question since there is no question, but you would get different feelings from this, from each of these 2 cards, I think. And I wanted to point that out. The next group. So it's, more or less a TDM variety. But the Swiss, there's just something about, the Swiss decks that are just, have a little bit of panache, a little bit of fun, I just think this is a beautiful 3 of Swords. We have growth within, but we also see a penetration outside. So although there's a protection or there's, the 3 is allowing for growth, it's also allowing for escape, not to be trapped like this card is, right? This flower now is trapped, but this one has the potential of growth beyond itself, beyond its container, because you see it's being pierced, right? I hope that makes sense. But this too can be a lovely thing. It doesn't necessarily mean repression or being trapped. It just means maybe to protect something that's special and beautiful. Just give it a little extra care, a little extra TLC. This reminds me of a good time. It kind of reminds me of the horns that I mentioned before in another video. I know they're not horns, but it strikes me as, I mentioned, well, I'll get to this card when I get to it. But, a good time with the heart, a happy time, celebration. It's, it's very clearly illustrated here, even though it's non-scenic. Now, traditionally, the 9 of Cups is the wish card. When it appears, a person might get their wish, It's the fulfillment of emotional satisfaction. Now, if it was surrounded by swords and batons, maybe I would say be careful what you wish for, because although you might get it, it might not be all that you're hoping for. But if we see the 9 of Cups by itself, as we are in this video, you get you think, okay, a wish fulfillment, we have 1 cup that is protected, 2 that are semi-protected, and 6 that are on their own. So it could be a sense of, keeping something maybe keeping something secret if you're not interpreting it as a wish card, in other words. You know, keeping, putting a certain amount of cards on the table, but keeping a few private or semi-private, or to disclose something in stages, This is just such a fun, expressive card. Opportunity. And, I know it's a coin, but, it could look like a door knocker, I did a reading for myself once, and it reminded me of a door knocker. Not this particular deck. I don't know if I was using a different deck, but the medallion, the way it was, really reminded me of a door knocker, which has nothing to do with the ace of coin, except that you knock on a door for opportunity. In a way, it kind of is similar to, an opportunity of the material kind. But it could take you down another understanding if you look at it and think of it as something else. Once I was using, I was using the cards to help me find something I lost, and I racked my brain. Oh my gosh, I couldn't find the thing, and I'd been looking for like better part of a year. And several, coin cards popped up, but the way they popped up made me think of dishes on a shelf, And then sure enough, I went into the kitchen and started looking around, and, it wasn't in my kitchen, but it was under a plate in the family room, which adjoins to the kitchen. So if you let yourself use the cards in a more fluid way, where you're not necessarily trying to always have a standard meaning, and it's helpful to have standard meanings in your heads, but if you also allow yourself to see the cards for what they are, sometimes it, triggers, or it releases a train of thought. Now here is the Four of Coins that I've referenced a couple of times and kind of was touching on with the Two of Coins. It just looks like celebration and confetti and horn blowing of, New Year's or something. So it just looks like a happy time, a fun time. 4 is a stable number, and I wouldn't forget that. It would certainly be, part of my interpretation, saying that, the 4 coins is a good stable number for well-being, but it also is a reminder of fun, or that, fun in a controlled environment or a controlled setting where there's little risk might not be a bad idea. And I already mentioned this one. Okay, moving along. We have the 8 swords. Each sword is different from the other. So, it makes me think like everyone has, their own battle, or their own, their own tool to address life. Pick your battle, or pick your weapon, right? For whatever battle or whatever thing you need for the day, to get through the day. Pick your weapon wisely, or your course of action. It doesn't have to be a violent thing like a weapon. Now, this isn't the 3 of Swords, but but it does reference, I think, the Solabuska that came before it. Although, the Vachetta, Vachetta himself may not have been aware of the Solabuska. I think that was kept in a private family vault or something. I don't know if the Solabuska was commonly known at this time in the late 1800s, but it might have been. Pamela Coleman Smith in 1909 certainly knew of it. Obviously she knew of it. So it's possible, it is possible that Vachetta was familiar with the Solabuska in the late 1890s and, borrowed a concept and from that deck. And here we have 10. You have lots of options, but one stands out, right? One is a clear choice, which is different from how I would normally maybe interpret the 10 of Cups. 10 being a number of saturation, like I mentioned over here. It's so overstated, right? The vibration is so overstated that we're getting back to zero. We're getting back to the beginning. But here I don't necessarily get that. It's just that there are lots of options, and this one is the wise, or this one is the clear choice. So it's a different understanding. Here, if we look at these batons, similarly to I think it was the Eight of Swords, where each sword was different. Each one of these batons is different. Each one is a different, either a different object that one might need. We have a crutch. I'm not sure what that is. I'm not sure what a lot of them are. This one's a simple walking stick, maybe. This one, is kind of sword-like, but maybe a ceremonial wand or a ceremonial object. It's got, ooh, look at that. So I don't even know what these objects are. But it's a case where if you look at it and you're thinking of the context of the question, maybe the person's injured, and right away you notice the baton that kind of resembles a crutch, right? Maybe wow, look at that. That's so pretty. Maybe just one little piece of this that will, make you think of something that relates to the question. Maybe the person's a student, and he's raising his hand. So there's all kinds of visual clues in the more expressive pip cards. They're not traditional TDM or, what we think of as TDM. Now here we have like musical, we have a pan, flute, and a horn, and drumsticks. Okay. And the number 6. So I would combine the 6 being a perfect number, a beautiful number, the batons being a social thing, and then the musical instruments. And I would, think of, getting together for a jam session or to do something socially that involved music. And this kind of the same with the 8 of batons. And we kind of see this seen a concept that's similar in the Waite Coleman Smith deck, right? I think it's is it the 8 of Pentacles, where the person has tilled or harvested and they're taking a pause. And it's not the same suit, but it kind of gives the same vibe, right? So we have tools of the garden and a basket of bounty, right? And, it's kind of communicating, work and work for your efforts. And here's here's the result of work for your efforts. Or this is what you get, when you work hard. It could also be seen as a barrier, like get your bounty now because winter's coming and, you won't be able to do as much. And the 10 of batons, again, can definitely look like a fence or a barrier, but there's always a way through. We got this little frog, There's always a weak spot. This little frog, I don't think you'll have any trouble going through that little gap there. So, although it's a 10 and although it looks like a pretty significant barrier for a human to pass through, there's always a weak point. There's always a way. And it might be a reminder that there's always a way. Now, some of these interpretations that I've given on the fly here. Um, you know, I might see them differently if they were really in the context of a real spread with a real question. Oh, again, another good time. Music. 4 being a nice stable number of well-being. Oh, much like the 4 here, the 4 of coins here, right? A good time in a controlled setting, maybe. We have the same thing, you know. Now, I think these might probably be peacock feathers, but they kind of also resemble, you know, fern, like at Christmas, right? Or pine, actually, pine. You know, and we have the bells that kind of remind me of jingle bells. And then we have the color of like Christmas. And then, of course, you know, music. So it kind of reminds me of like a holiday, enjoying a holiday spirit. You know, depending on what time of year it falls, it may be appropriate. You know, if someone's feeling lonely, it might be appropriate to say, have a party, you know, and invite people that, you know, are in your inner square or your inner circle, right? Invite people that you trust or love, or people that you know you can count on, and have a little thing. Have fun. I don't remember if I think I already did this one. So now we have a 6 of swords, and in the middle we have you know, an eye. Like, are you being watched? Right? Do you have a secret you're protecting that someone else might be aware of? Obviously, whenever there's blood in a card, it could suggest containing a wound, you know. Again, the swords kind of frame the blood. So trying to contain or maybe control the flow of suffering. 8 is a perfect number. You know, it's a good number. It's a number of stability. So maybe of regaining composure. And this is fun. We often see, you know, the 9 of cups as the wish card, you know, right? And 10 is oversaturation. So maybe, you know, you're overly emotional. It could be, you know, if there's other, like if there's swords and maybe batons around it, you know, maybe overly emotional. But this card sort of reminds me of just being very generous. You have enough to share, right? These cups all have liquid in them. And the last cup is being filled. Well, the last cup is filling the last of the tier of 3. So this one kind of feels like different to me. It's not just that it's oversaturated 10, but it's like there's enough to share. And here's a barrier, right? It seems like the 4s are the most expressive cards I'm noticing as I've like pulled a bunch of cards. It seems like there's a lot of 4s. But here, you know, we have the stability of 4, and then we have what looks like a coat of arms, you know. So there could be like you know, and the coat of arms is usually associated with families or you know, like, you know, like family. Every family, you know, has a coat of arms. You know, whether we know it or not, there is a coat of arms for our surnames, right? So this, you know, has a feel of, you know, stable family or something about the family. So I hope this video has been somewhat helpful or interesting to you in understanding that there might be times when you look at a card and you can't be guided by its visual clues, even if they're not scenic. You know, sometimes there's something about the card that just has a little extra flair to it, you know, and you know, you might respond to it in a way different than you would if you were just trying to, you know, combine number and suit. Anyway, friends, until next time, peace and stay well.